So if you don't know, my name is Luke, I'm a junior at Harvard, and about 2 weeks ago I was able to view my Harvard admissions package. And in this video I just want to tell you a bit what that was like and some of my thoughts afterwards. So to start off, I have a weekly meeting with one of the missionaries at the Harvard Catholic Center. His name's Peter, he's a very good friend of mine. But when I was supposed to view my admissions package, it would conflict with that meeting, so I got Peter to come with me because I knew I was just going to take pictures of my admissions file and then leave. So I meet up with Peter at our student center and then go up to the 9th floor, where I am now in a room with a bunch of other nervous students waiting to view their admissions file. And this woman comes in and she has all the files and she says, just give us your ID and then you can have your file and then you can turn it back in. So after she finishes her speech, I go up, I give her my ID, get my file. I'm kind of reading through it, but I'm mostly just taking pictures so I can view them later, and Peter's just sitting there waiting. And the woman notices that Peter is the only one who hasn't stood up to try to retrieve their admissions file, so she asks, "Are you a student here?" And he says, "No." And then she says, "Well, only students are allowed to be here." And I'm like, "Oh no, he's just with me for emotional support." And then she's like, "Well, he can't be here." And that was fine because I had already taken pictures of my admissions file and I was gonna leave anyways. So she told us to leave when we were leaving. So it ended up not being a big deal, but I just thought that was kind of funny. Anyways, now let's talk about what was actually on the admissions file. So the front page has a lot of unlabeled numbers that don't make a lot of sense. However, this information has since become publicly available as a result of Harvard's admissions lawsuit. So the scores I received, and they're on a scale from 1 to 4, with 1 being the best. 1 is like ridiculous. If you get a 1 in any score, you have a higher than 50% chance of getting in, and whereas 4 would be the lowest. But on academics, I had a 2-. On extracurriculars, I had a 2. On athletics, I had a 3+. And on personality, I also had a 2. And then for my teacher recommendations, they rank your teacher recommendations. I had a 2+ on one of them and a 3+ on one of the others. I don't know which one was which, actually. And then for my alumni interview, which they schedule admissions interviews with either an admissions officer or, in most cases, an alumnus of the college. So in my alumni interview, I got a 1. I'm not actually sure if a 1 on the alumni interview is significant. I think my alumni interviewer just hyped me up a bunch, but anyways, I'll take it. I'm okay with that. But that evaluation does ultimately come from the interviewer, whereas the teacher recommendation numbers and all the other numbers come from the admissions officer actually reading my application. So now I'll read the comments from the admissions officers who read my application. So from what I understand, you get sort of a first round overall look from one admissions officer. It's much deeper, and then you get kind of a confirmation look from another admissions officer. So the more in-depth admissions officer said, "A strong school leader to compare with others with all info at hand, sounds very hardworking and could find a number of things to do here." And then the other admissions officer said, "A possibility, but will need comparison as a choice. School leader, good student, with interview in hand. A choice now lacking a distinguishing excellence, but he has done impressively in a range of areas, all the more notable in light of a very tough home situation." So to give you some context for the leadership stuff they were talking about, I was student body president in high school, so I think that definitely contributed a lot to my application. And also I got deferred. So when they said, "We'll need to compare with others," you can apply early and then they can either admit you, reject you, or defer you. In most cases, they will defer you and that puts you into the regular application pool. So I did get deferred and then I got in the regular application round. It's worth noting that in one of their comments, there is an edit afterwards, which came presumably after I had gotten deferred. It says, "Edit now with ROTC tug." So for context, I do ROTC now, and it sounds like that definitely helped me in some respects. I kind of figured that ROTC added a lot to my application because I had received the scholarship after I got deferred. I didn't have the scholarship before I got deferred, so that all makes sense. Anyways, so overall, they gave me a score of a 3+. So essentially what they do is they look at all the scores and then give you an overall score, and mine ended up being a 3+, which I thought was a little bit weird because that's the lowest score I got in anything. So instead of, like, an average would probably be more like a 2 or a 2-, but I ended up with a 3+. And I was a little bit shocked. I actually looked up admissions data. People with a 3+ end up having a 9% chance of getting in. So that definitely, I'll explain my feelings now. This is how I felt generally about looking at my application. So there was a lot of me that wanted to try to justify after seeing what the admissions officers wrote and how they evaluated me. like, oh, my application was better at other schools, maybe they didn't factor in this, and so on and so forth. And I know of other people who have viewed their admissions file and then have felt imposter syndrome, like they felt like they only got in because they were from a certain region of the country and that they don't actually belong at Harvard. So I think after a few hours of trying to justify and just think through this and process this and kind of maybe being a little bit salty, one could say, I then kind of had a different outlook. I saw it as a humbling and spiritual moment. So oftentimes I feel like I want to have this positive view of myself, like I'm so awesome, so on and so forth. For example, there was a part of me that felt like I was gonna get a 1 on my personality because I just have a winning personality, and that was what got me into Harvard, though I wouldn't admit that unironically before actually looking at the file. Though it shouldn't develop into an unhealthy hate of myself, I think it's important to remember that all of my strength, all my virtue, anything good that's within me comes from God and not from myself. Because I have so many hateful tendencies within myself and so many tendencies towards disorder, I think the only way I receive strength and goodness and so on and so forth comes from turning to God, or even from God working within me when I haven't wanted to turn to Him. So this was a good opportunity to realize that no, I myself am not strong, only the one who I serve is. I was reading this morning from The Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis. Very good book, would highly recommend, and it kind of touched on this. So the first quote is, "How great is the frailty of human nature which is ever prone to evil." And then in the paragraph before, "So long as we live in this fragile body, we can neither be free from sin nor live without weariness and sorrow. Gladly would we rest from all misery, but in losing innocence through sin, we also lost true blessedness. Therefore, we must have patience and await the mercy of God until this iniquity passes, until mortality is swallowed up in life." So essentially, life on earth, in that it is adulterated by sin, is miserable, and happiness comes through union with God. And ultimately, at the end of all time, if we are able to realize this on earth and turn to Him, then we will experience happiness forever in heaven, or the alternative, which is very bad. I think the other thing I learned from viewing my admissions file is just the general uncertainty of life. I don't know why I got into Harvard when I had supposedly a 9% chance of actually getting in, given that I was a 3+, but I still ended up there anyways. That doesn't make sense to me. And if I tried to think through myself why that was the way it was, I would never come to a conclusive answer. There are certain views of life that would say there is no answer. It's simply just because that's how the admissions officers decided to choose. And yes, the admissions officers have free will and all of that. That's a discussion for another day. But I don't know how me getting into Harvard fits into God's plan for my life. I'd like to think that, oh, I got into Harvard so that I can do all these things to glorify God, and hopefully that's the case, but also maybe it was so that I could go there and be humbled by being around so many smart people. And also, I think that has been the case so far to some extent. But really how that all works out and how that will work out for the rest of my life, I don't know. Isaiah 55 says that God's ways are not our ways. For us, it's impossible to make sense of what God is doing in our lives. So I think ultimately the best response to this uncertainty is to put our trust into God and to surrender to Him and try to not work out all these things with our life, but instead to just trust God. And obviously I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a plan for your life and you shouldn't set goals for yourself, but there comes a point where you're kind of just nitpicking and you're trying to do too much and control things that you can't control. And by you, I mean me, because I'm talking about myself here mostly, but if it applies to you, definitely feel free to take the advice. Anyways, that's all I've got for today, and thanks for watching.